Tonight, the death of OJ Simpson, the NFL star turned actor who was at the center of the trial of the century and the most memorable police chase of all time. In a statement, Simpson's family said he died surrounded by his children and grandchildren after a battle with cancer. It was a life of fame and infamy. We'll look back at the most controversial moments, including his acquittal over the murder of ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson. In a moment, I'll be speaking live to those who knew Simpson from both sides of that legal battle. Also on the program, Ukraine under attack. Russia has destroyed Kyiv's largest power station, while President Zelenskyy has lashed out at allies, saying they've ignored his appeals for better air defenses. In Ukraine's hour of need, we witness the numbers of Ukrainians dodging the draft and being punished for it. So are people losing the appetite to fight?
Everyone understands this. Many of my friends have already gone. Anyone who has their opportunity is leaving.
And could Iran launch a direct hit on Israel in response to this deadly attack? We'll look beyond the current war of words and ask what happens next. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. There's only one place to start tonight, and that's the death of OJ Simpson. His family says he died after a battle with cancer, aged 76. So how will he be remembered? Well, it's fair to say that few public figures have gripped and divided America quite like him. In a moment, we'll look back on his life and career, from electrifying audiences in the NFL to acting on screen to serious criminality that landed him in prison. One story dominates above all else, though: the deaths of his ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman inside her home 30 years ago. Afterwards, OJ Simpson went on the run and 95 million people watched live on TV as police chased after him. His eventual surrender brought about the trial of the century. That too captivated the country and brought unforgettable moments. But we all know how it ended. OJ Simpson walked free. In a moment, I'll be speaking live to his former manager and a lawyer who represented the family of his ex-wife, because all that is part of the story, which isn't over. Let's hear now from our US correspondent, Martha Kellner.
Suspect may be driving a white or light-colored Ford Bronco. Suspect is possibly armed. Use caution.
Their images etched in the minds of millions of people. A car chase more watched than almost any live TV show in history.
Look at this.
Wow.
As people are lining up on the bridges over the 405.
OJ Simpson, at this point a fugitive from justice, suspected of killing his former wife and her friend.
Hold on, right here. This is what police were hoping wouldn't happen.
Viewers watched as a police officer tries to convince him to surrender. OJ Simpson had been an emblem of all-American success, the son of a chef and a nurse who became an NFL superstar. He was fond of saying, "I'm not black, I'm OJ," parlaying his fame off the field too.
Nordberg, how you, buddy? Hey.
Starring in Hollywood films like Naked Gun.
Watch O.J. Simpson, #1 halfback, demonstrate a really close shave.
And advertising campaigns which transformed entire companies.
And this is Tree Sweet, the orange juice I grew up on.
A country which loves winners welded itself to his success. The man known as the Juice, briefly putting a squeeze on racial division. But his colour was about to become everything. In 1994, O.J. Simpson's ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, was found stabbed to death at her home in an upmarket part of Los Angeles, alongside her friend Ron Goldman. The prime suspect was OJ, and his trial the next year transfixed a nation.
Ask him to straighten his fingers and extend them into the glove.
The standout moment was when a prosecutor asked Simpson to try on a pair of gloves, believed to have been worn by the killer. They appeared to be too small for him, a hiccup seized upon by the defence.
It doesn't fit. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
The trial held up a cracked mirror to black and white America. Most white people, polls showed, believed he was guilty. Most black people believed him to be the victim of a racist justice system. Millions watched as the verdict was delivered after just 4 hours of deliberation.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder.
His lawyer at the time, Alan Dershowitz, says it was a dramatic time in American criminal history.
There was overwhelming evidence that might suggest that he did it. And then there was one piece of evidence that was tampered with, the sock that had his blood and the blood of the victim on it. And we were able to prove that the blood was poured by police officer Van Adder, and it contained a chemical in it that's found in test tubes, but not in the human body. And so the jury concluded that a very important piece of evidence was tampered with by the government, and that's the reason they acquitted. They didn't trust the rest of the evidence.
The trial of OJ Simpson at the Los Angeles Superior Court lasted 11 months. It was carried live on television for all of that time, from gavel to gavel, making this one of the biggest events in American pop culture history. It made household names of the lawyers, the witnesses, even some of the jury members. But ultimately, that decision to acquit OJ divided America. Do you think that OJ was innocent?
Hell no, everybody knows he was guilty. Come on. It was just racial payback.
People forget that he killed somebody. They just remember he was famous. And fame makes money in America. It gets hits. It gets attention.
Did you watch the trial back in the 90s?
I did. I watched the whole thing, right through my city, you know. He got away with murder, but hey, he's dead now, so put it to rest. It's all good.
There was enough information to know that he's probably guilty of murder.
OJ Simpson did eventually serve time in prison. He was convicted of armed robbery in 2007 after raiding a Las Vegas hotel room and stealing memorabilia that once belonged to him.
Count 1, conspiracy to commit a crime. Guilty.
Many said this was payback by the justice system for the controversial acquittal. Simpson served 9 years and tried to resurrect his career afterwards, but lived his final years quietly. This a video he released in February, playing down the severity of his illness.
My health is good. I mean, obviously I'm dealing with some issues, but hey, I think I'm just about over it, and I'll be back on that golf course, hopefully in a couple of weeks.
OJ Simpson's legacy is a complicated one. From an iconic American hero to a person many believe got away with murder. His life trajectory was as tragic as it was dramatic, but it was always compelling. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Los Angeles.
And Martha joins me now. Martha, I'm just going to pick up on what you said there. You know, what a complicated, complex figure he was, one that his trial mesmerised and divided America. And just listening to some of those Americans saying to you, well, of course, we know he did it. It was really the trial of the century.
Yeah, that's how it was billed, Yalda, the trial of the century. I was mentioning there the fact that CNN carried the entirety of this trial, every cough and spit, every bit of evidence, every person that took the stand for 11 months. And this was not at a time where there was a proliferation of satellite TV channels or streamers. So for many people growing up in America, this event, this live trial of OJ Simpson, defined their childhoods watching television. It really was that big. And I was just speaking to some of the American journalists who are here covering today's news of OJ Simpson's death. Many of them were also here back when the trial was actually happening. So round the back of the courthouse behind me, there's a car park which became known by the media as Camp OJ. So you had all the big American TV anchors there, as well as people dispatched internationally to come here to cover the trial of its entirety. So Camp OJ is how that was known. And one of the producers that I was speaking to was saying that the trial of OJ Simpson and the subsequent civil trial 2 years later, in which he was found liable for the deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, those two trials made the careers of people in front of and behind the camera. This producer was saying to me that people quite literally bought houses, cars and boats off the back of that trial. That is just how big that it was, and it transformed the way that criminal and civil trials are covered in America. Just one final point to make about how significant this trial was as a moment in American pop culture history. I was reading earlier on that a man writing an account of the period around the OJ trial, he was saying that his high school announced live on their tannoy system the moment that this verdict was handed down. Imagine that, being wandering the halls of your high school and the OJ Simpson verdict was read out. That is just how important it felt in the minds of millions of Americans at that time.
Yeah, very much so. It had gripped not just America, but the world. Martha, thanks so much. We will be coming back to you in about 10 minutes' time. But let's speak now to Norma Pardo, OJ Simpson's former manager. Thank you so much, Norma, for joining us. You saw him, you met him about a month ago. How was he when you spoke to him?
He was good. I mean, we bonded and we
We've just lost sound there. Can you hear me, Norma?
dispute.
Norman.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can. Please go ahead.
Because of a movie I made, OJ got mad at me, so we were angry at each other for a while. But then he called because he was sick, and he didn't want to leave the world that way.
So he, I mean, a number of times he released videos where he sort of played down his health problems, but he knew he was dying.
Yeah. He played him down, but everybody else knew what was going on. He lost a lot of weight. He didn't look good. And you can't keep that a secret.
Yeah, I mean, he was such a complicated, complex figure, wasn't he? And just when you look at his career and everything that happened in his life, I mean, it was a spectacular fall.
Yes, it was. And that's why I got involved. And I spent 20 years just filming him, and it was just it was a very interesting thing because he's not what everybody thinks he is. I just put the videos up online. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, but at ojtapes.com, you can go there and actually watch video unscripted for the first time in history, where he's just being OJ.
Did he come to terms with everything that happened, the trial, the acquittal, the murder,
He never came to terms with that because he felt he didn't do it, and he felt everybody took everything from him and they shouldn't have.
And yet there are millions of people who believe that he did do it. And that is how...
But they didn't take the time to actually... See, I spent 20 years with OJ and trying to find out what really happened because OJ didn't want to tell me either. And that's why, if you go to ojtapes.com, you'll see a whole documentary on what really happened, who did it and why, and from everybody's point of view, including OJ's. But it wasn't what everybody thought. It wasn't even close to what they had on TV.
Yeah, I mean, Norman, I guess there are many people who would also say that they don't want to glorify OJ Simpson, that, there is a lot here that many women, those from domestic violence backgrounds as well, would take issue around the fact that he's still being described as this, massive sporting hero in America.
Yep. Well, OJ had a whole bunch of different faces. He was like a chameleon. So there was never one OJ you could deal with. It was always this OJ or that OJ or which OJ were you today? When we got into some of our biggest fights, that's what it was all about because OJ changed. He wasn't a real nice guy. Was he a murderer? No. Was he there, but when it first started? Yeah. I mean, there's so many things that's involved that you just can't. You can't understand OJ until you see it. Really, you have to see OJ, and then you can understand him. Right now, people just they go by what the media says. The real OJ is different. I'm not saying he's a nice guy by no means. He's not. I mean, I admit that. I mean, he was all about the money and everything they owed him. I mean, every time we talked, it was always that's mine, that's mine, that's mine. Because I think the family of his ex-wife and others are still waiting for a lot of money that they believe OJ Simpson owes them. Norman Pardo will have to leave it there. And he always felt that they owed him. That was the irony of the whole thing. He said, look what they did to my life.
Norman Pardo, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, joining me now to discuss this more is David Cook, an attorney for Ron Goldman's family. Thank you so much, David, for joining us. So, I mean, you would have heard there Norman Pardo, OJ Simpson's former manager, talking there. Just your reaction to what he had to say and also the death of OJ Simpson.
Well, when I found out this morning, it came to me quickly that, and given that I had spent many years with OJ Simpson over matters is the following, that he died, and he died without any penance. Just that simple. He died, and he died without any penance whatsoever. And that's the big deal here, because it really led to the murder of his wife and Ron Goldman here. And no matter what, obviously, it was a acquittal, but nonetheless, the murder remained the same. And throughout the years, Mr. Simpson, kept saying, "I will not get a penny to Goldman." Never a dime there.
And I mean, there's a lot of questions around the money that is owed, to his ex-wife's family and to Mr. Ron Goldman's family. Where is that at now?
Which you're talking about Simpson?
Yes.
His money is?
Well, the money that his ex-wife's family believe that's still owed to them.
Well, I can tell you, I dealt with this, and then lawyers before me, we end up in court trying to obtain money from Simpson here. And in both cases, including mine, we were unable to obtain any money from the pension and or trust or anything else. Neither one of us got both. In other words, the one some 20, 25 years old, and I couldn't get any money out here. We knew that he had funds tied up in either a pension and or a trust or whatever. We couldn't get any money out of that. We did get money from his book called From If I Did It, and we ultimately got that and turned that into I Did It, and we got money from that for Fred, and we obtained money from one of the movies, and we got some money out of the matter in Florida. So we got some money out of it.
Yeah, David, I'm curious to know how you and those who, worked on this to try and get the money and know the case really well and know OJ Simpson well, how do you believe he should be remembered?
How do I do what again?
How do you believe he should be remembered?
I review and consider Simpson as what he was, that he was a bad person. He was a murderer. He got out of the acquittal here. He ended up with a judgment against him of $114 million. I renewed it in 2022 for $26 million, and now it's $114 million. He remains now and in his death as the day that he committed the crime in whatever the amount of years. He's still the same person. And the fact that he dies doesn't change it.
Yep. David Cook, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Let's go back to Martha, who joins us from Los Angeles. And Martha, I mean, I've just been speaking to his former manager, as well as David Cook, who I was just speaking to now. He really was such a polarizing figure, really divided people and their views on him and what they believe they believe he should be remembered.
Yeah, I think what was interesting just in the streets of Los Angeles this morning, speaking to people, is how much views seem to have shifted on his innocence or guilt. At the time of the trial, polling, and there was much polling done at that time, showed that most white people believed that OJ Simpson was guilty, but most black people believed he was an innocent and the victim of a racist justice system. Whereas speaking to people of all colours this morning, they all, to a man, believed that OJ Simpson was guilty of the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman. So perhaps views have shifted in the intervening 30 years, or perhaps I was just speaking to a specific group of people. I'm going to bring in now Brian Dunn, who's a civil rights attorney, familiar, of course, with the trial of OJ Simpson. Brian, what are your personal memories from that time of this trial, 11 months long?
It was an electric time. And one of the things that most people don't understand is that we were working in a fishbowl at the firm, and we weren't as aware of how we were being perceived by the public when this was all happening. It was a case of an attorney and a group of attorneys, I should say, working their damnedest to get a man his best chance at a fair trial in a very difficult case. And it's interesting that we look at now the historical implications of it. We were completely unaware that this was something that was going to be talked about 30 years later, that this was going to be something that rocked the nation in the way that it did. And when you think about what we were doing, we were interested in the criminal defense of a person that was charged with a double homicide. Why is this case so much more than a double homicide? Why is it so much more than what happened in the courtroom? It has to do with the history of this country, the social divisions. It has to do with race. It has to do with a lot of the elephants in the room that we don't like to talk about.
And I think it's important to point out that this trial came at sort of a powder keg moment for Los Angeles, 2 years after the LA riots, which were sparked by the police brutality committed on Rodney King. How much did that play into how this trial was viewed in the minds of millions of Americans?
If you talk to every single person in this city, they will give you a different answer. And in terms of those types of implications, you just have to understand, we don't like to talk about a lot of things in this country. We don't like to address a lot of the social issues. Not every aspect of American history is pretty. And sometimes these things come to light in a very focused manner that just catch us unaware. But if you look at where we are now, I mean, we're about 3 decades out of that. Have we made any progress? Are we still racked by the same kinds of social divisions that created all of these problems then? Those are the questions we need to be asking.
A couple of quick questions, very quick to finish, Brian. Do you believe OJ Simpson was innocent, and do you believe he received a fair trial?
That is probably the most common question that I'm asked, and I always say that the answer to that riddle depends on the beholder. Some people will believe one thing, and other people will believe another thing. But what it really is about is each side wants to be right, and they want their side to be right and the other side to be wrong. And that's why we have such an eternal problem. We are fighting now, and we don't understand that the fighting is the problem. Every side just wants to be right.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Brian. Brian Dunn there, civil rights attorney who fought to get a fair trial for OJ Simpson. He was clearly famously acquitted in the criminal trial of the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, but he was found civilly liable for their deaths in a wrongful death lawsuit heard just around 15 miles down the road from here in Santa Monica 2 years later. The debate about OJ Simpson and his guilt or his innocence goes on.
Yeah, indeed it does. Martha, thank you so much. Well, let's speak now to Gloria Allred, who represented the family of Nicole Brown Simpson. Thank you so much, Gloria, for joining us here on the programme. I first want to get your reaction to OJ Simpson's death today.
Well, I did represent the family of the victim, Nicole Brown Simpson, during the criminal trial as their victim's rights attorney. And as has just been pointed out, although he was acquitted in the criminal case, he was found liable in the civil lawsuit in Santa Monica some years later. And I think that means that, in fact, the jury found him liable or responsible for killing Nicole and Ronald Goldman, may they rest in peace. And what was the difference between the criminal trial and the civil? Well, of course, beyond a reasonable doubt is the standard in a criminal case, and less proof is required in a civil case. But another important difference was that he did not testify in the criminal case. He had the right to invoke his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination, and he was not required to testify and didn't. However, in the civil case, he was required to testify because he could not be criminally prosecuted twice. That's called double jeopardy. And so he didn't have his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination anymore. and he testified, and the jury didn't believe him. They didn't find him credible. When he sat next to a big...
Do you think the initial acquittal, though, what kind of... Sorry, go ahead.
They didn't find him credible, as he testified next to a big photo of Nicole Brown Simpson showing her black eye, which he inflicted on her in his spousal battery case 5 years earlier, and therefore they found him liable. So,
Gloria, do you think, though, today, you know, there's a lot of talk around OJ Simpson, his legacy. Do you think that Americans are thinking about, you know, Nicole and the case and what happened and other victims of domestic violence? Or do you think that he's being almost glorified? Because there are headlines still talking about the fact that he was, you know, this famous, massive sports star.
Well, yes, everybody's talking about O.J. Simpson, but who's talking about Nicole Brown Simpson, the victim, and also Ronald Goldman, the victims? I'm talking about them because those victims should be remembered. And what happened 5 years before he killed Nicole was that he gave her that black eye. She ran out of the house. She was terrified. She hid in the bushes. The police came. He was arrested, charged with spousal battery. And what were the consequences of that case? He admitted, in other words, he pled no contest to a spousal battery, but he never was sent to jail. In fact, it's really questionable as whether he did anything that the judge required him to do, even out of jail, community service, for example.
And yet
for a batterer, for a victim, it's only going to get worse for the victim of domestic violence. That's what happened. He killed her.
Yeah, and yet the trial mesmerized America. People were gripped. Tens of millions of people were watching every twist and turn.
Yes, it was the first big trial on Court TV, and a lot of other stations, networks covered it. I was there the day that the decision, the verdict of the jury came down, sitting with Denise, Nicole's sister, and Nicole's father, Lou, in the courtroom. And we were just absolutely shocked with the verdict. But, you know, the point is the system was felt by many people to have failed. This was a case about a battered woman, but the defense made it a case with a racial narrative. In other words, they were trying to suggest that because O.J. Simpson was a successful, powerful, famous celebrity, African-American, that somehow the system was trying to bring him down, and that's all that this case was about. And then domestic violence became just a footnote, as opposed to the real story, and there was a mountain of evidence against O.J. Simpson, blood all over the scene, his blood. So it was really disappointing what the result was.
Gloria Allred, we're really grateful that you've joined us here on the programme. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Now to the rest of the day's news. And Ukraine has come under intense attack today. Russia launched more than 80 missiles and drones at cities across the country, and it claimed a major scalp. Kyiv's main power station was completely destroyed, cutting power to over 200,000 people. Attacking key infrastructure has been a tactic deployed throughout the war, designed to damage morale. And it couldn't come at a worse time. Kyiv's ability to defend itself has been diminished by falling troop numbers. In response, Ukraine's parliament today passed a new law to lower the conscription age from 27 to 25. But is there the appetite to join the fight? Well, Sky News has seen how many Ukrainians are dodging the draft and paying people smugglers to get them out of the country to avoid fighting on the front line. It's happening in Ukraine's hour of need, with Kyiv struggling to hold back a Russian onslaught and fears of a bigger offensive to come this summer. Our international correspondent John Sparks reports.
On the battlefields of the east, Ukraine tries to repel the Russians. But on the western frontier, it's engaged in a different sort of war. Here, the authorities are trying to stop their citizens from getting out. They're needed in the army. It's short of recruits. But there are thousands of Ukrainians, like these men caught near the border with Romania, who do not want to fight. We make contact with a man preparing to flee through the mountains of western Ukraine. He calls himself Ivan and says he can't wait any longer.
I'm not being disloyal. Everyone understands this. Many of my friends have already gone. Anyone who has the opportunity is leaving.
And in a groundbreaking interview, we meet a smuggler who helps young men flee before they're conscripted. Stas says he's not ashamed of what he does.
People simply aren't ready to die. Young people aren't ready to bury themselves alive. So they turn to us for help. A lot of people are turning to us.
Some call them traitors. Others say they're weak. But every day, the authorities catch men suspected of dodging the draft. And the number of deserters is expected to climb as the government lowers the enlistment age from 27 to 25. In December, the army said it needed up to 500,000 more troops. It's a very sensitive matter, said President Zelenskyy, but he has bowed to the wishes of his generals. 2 years ago, a great wave of volunteers raced to sign up. But exhaustion has set in at the front, and the army is struggling to replace them. These images show members of 3rd Brigade fighting for their lives in the city of Avdiivka. At their recruitment center, we found a few men and a woman making inquiries. Some apply to join specific units before the military makes the decision for them. Mikola is about to begin basic training.
Of course, it's unpleasant, but it's the harsh reality, I believe. Whether you like it or not, if you want to be useful, you're going to have to, do whatever it takes.
Have you told your friends that you're doing this?
Actually, no. I didn't. I told my best friend, and she was surprised because it's not common, obviously, to actually act and not just talk. But she wished me luck, of course.
The recruitment officer, Sergeant Koval, lost his left arm at the front. I asked him whether it puts people off.
If candidates are deterred by seeing my injuries in the flesh and choose to stay with us, well, they're our people. But if they don't realize what could happen, then they're just not for us.
He is matter-of-fact and unsentimental, like some of his colleagues nationwide. Recruitment officers have become increasingly aggressive, pulling men off the streets when they're suspected of avoiding military service. But these methods provoke real resentment in Ukraine. And that feeling may grow. A major mobilization bill is moving through Parliament, and that may allow the army to summon recruits via email. But Ivan's not going to wait for that.
There are people who will guide us through the forest where we are now. I can't say how it's happening, but I know there's a passage we can take. I just need some peace, you know? I want to live, for myself, first and foremost.
He's really nervous, very, very jittery, but he's not going to change his mind. I mean, his mind's made up.
Ivan will pay $6,000 to escape, The smuggler told us the cost has soared as he pays his contacts to look the other way.
In the past 5 months, it's been very hard to work because border controls are tightening. They're checking everything. You know, it's easier to swim across than doing it by foot.
Is it a business? Is it about helping these young people? I mean, why are you doing this?
He didn't want to answer. The defense of Ukraine rests on the shoulders of middle-aged men. They're battered and bloodied. Many need relief, but thousands of Ukrainians don't think it's their responsibility. The government will have to persuade them. John Sparks, Sky News, in Western Ukraine.
Okay, don't go anywhere. We've got lots more coming up after the break. It's been 2 years since the Kremlin critic Vladimir Kara-Murza was locked up in a prison. We'll be speaking live to his wife here in the studio, Evgenia. She says she has concerns about his fate and his future and really worried that he may suffer the same fate as Alexei Navalny. Stay with us for that. Welcome back. It's now 2 years since the Kremlin critic Vladimir Kara-Murza was locked up in a Russian jail. The dual British citizen was convicted of treason, charges that he and his supporters say were politically motivated. Vladimir's wife, Evgenia, has expressed fears he could suffer the same fate as Alexei Navalny. Well, Evgenia joins me now live here in the studio. It's so good to see you in person. We've spoken many times remotely. I mean, you have very genuine fears about your husband's future. You say that his path is following the same as Alexei Navalny.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. And I want to begin to say that Vladimir actually shares this sad anniversary with another Russian who is suffering because of her anti-war position. Sasha Skochilenko, Alexandra Skochilenko, that young artist from St. Petersburg who replaced price tags at a local supermarket with anti-war messages, also has her 2-year detention arrest anniversary today. She was sentenced to 7 years for that simple act of replacing price tags with anti-war messages 2 years ago. As for Vladimir, our family has been living with this for many years. When I'm asked if Alexei Navalny's murder created new fears for me, I usually respond, and that is the truth. I've been living with this for years. I have been afraid for my husband's life since 2015, when he survived the first poisoning attack.
He's been poisoned twice.
He was poisoned twice in 2015 and 2017. Both times he was in a coma with a multiple organ failure, and both times he was given a 5% chance to survive. So I know that this regime sees my husband as a personal threat, as a personal enemy. And we know that this is the state that is behind it because thanks to an independent investigation by Bellingcat, The Insider and Der Spiegel, we know that my husband had been followed before both attacks by the same team of FSB operatives that poisoned Alexei Navalny with Novichok and the same team that had followed Boris Nemtsov before his assassination.
Evgenia, many would ask the same question they asked of Alexei Navalny. Why did he go back to Russia when he knew about these threats and the threats to his life?
It's not that he went back to Russia. He refused to leave Russia. Vladimir identifies himself as a Russian politician, and he believes that it would not be morally fair for him to ask of his compatriots to continue resisting the regime if he himself were not prepared to share the risks and challenges faced by Russians back home. So, Vladimir grew up with those stories of Soviet dissidents, and he researched the history of their movement.
His whole family.
And his whole family, of course, his father was one of the first independent journalists in the post-Soviet Russia. And my husband's mentor was Boris Nemtsov. And Vladimir knew and still knows many of those Soviet dissidents. Some of them passed away, but some of them are still here. Vladimir Bukovsky, Natan Sharansky, Alexander Podrobinnik, Helena Bonner, Pavel Litvinov, Viktor Feinberg, Natalia Gorbanevskaya. He knows these people. And so he knows that a small handful of people can resist, can oppose a huge, massive state machine and prevail.
But given what happened to Alexei Navalny, have you lost hope?
No, I can never lose hope. I'm married to an amazing guy who encourages people even from behind bars. How can I lose hope? And besides, I see the stories of these political prisoners. I just told you the story of Sasha Skochilenko. I remember her, the pictures that were made in court during her trial. And she was given this 7-year sentence. She was smiling behind bars. So that is defiance. When my husband said after Alexei Navalny's murder, he said that we could not give up, that we owed it to our fallen friends and comrades to continue the fight. and make sure that Russia does become a democratic country, a free country that is no longer a threat to itself and its neighbors. I feel that those words are contagious, and spoken from behind bars, they're even more contagious.
In those conditions, Evgenia, he's incredibly brave. Thank you so much for joining us and speaking to us on the eve of the anniversary of his imprisonment. This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Do stay with us. We've got a lot more coming up. We'll be speaking with our correspondent Dominic Waghorn about the latest war of words between Iran and Israel. There are many who are worried about whether Iran would actually directly bomb Israel. Do stay with us for that.
And coming up on Sky News at 10, more on the life of OJ Simpson and the latest reaction to his death. Concerted diplomatic moves from the US tonight in the face of possible escalation from Iran in the Middle East conflict. And we hear from Caroline Flack's mother as police say they will reinvestigate the decision to charge the TV presenter before she took her own life. All that and more at 10.
I'm Adam Parsons. I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
More flares going off, a volley of rocks, cobbles have been pulled up out and are being used as missiles to hurl at these police.
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. We have now left Italy and entered France. Nobody's asked to check our identity. Made by people who dare to challenge.
Nice to see you again, Mr. Barnier. Why?
Meeting you. Fishing does have the potential to stymie an enormous economic deal. What strikes you when you come to this glacier is not just the way in which the environment is changing, but the speed at which those changes are happening.
It's devastating, actually.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent. I've reported from around the world and around the UK.
I'm Mark Stone, I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Washington, DC. And beyond the United States, from across the world, I report on the biggest stories.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I remember some of the worst of the violence here.
I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
Welcome back. What would happen if Iran directly bombed Israel? Well, a scenario few thought possible is now being given some serious thought. Benjamin Netanyahu says that despite war raging in Gaza, his army is preparing for the possibility of conflict flaring up in what he described as other arenas. It comes after Iran's supreme leader said Israel must be punished for an attack on its embassy in Syria at the start of the month. Here's our international correspondent, Alex Rossi.
In Ashkelon, a city on the border with Gaza, they are used to living under rockets from Hamas, but they're worried about an aerial attack from an even bigger enemy. At this bar mitzvah, a rite of passage for every Jewish boy, the atmosphere is subdued. There's drinks and jokes, but the talk is of war and security.
I hope that there is nothing happened from Iran. It's very terrified. Today we celebrate our bar mitzvah, my son, and I couldn't sleep at night, always worrying all this situation, and I hope it's all over.
For years, Israel and Iran have been enemies, but the shadow war that's been fought between them is now threatening to burst into the open. There's no doubt that Israel lives in a rough and dangerous neighborhood, and since its creation in 1948, it has faced a number of existential threats. But the trauma of October the 7th has left this nation feeling especially vulnerable. Iran is vowing retaliation after 2 generals were killed in this airstrike on the consulate in Damascus. The US is warning an Iranian missile attack on Israeli soil could be imminent. Israel's government says it's prepared for every eventuality.
We established a simple principle. Whoever hurts us, we hurt them. We are preparing to meet the security needs of the State of Israel, both in defense and in attack.
Israel's #1 ally, America, is hoping its security guarantees will act as a deterrent.
As I told Prime Minister Netanyahu, our commitment to Israel's security against these threats from Iran and its proxies is ironclad. Let me say it again, ironclad. We're going to do all we can to protect Israel's security.
But Israelis know an Iranian attack will bring a response from the IDF, and with it, the chance of a much wider regional war.
I'm always worried until we have elements like in Iran. Okay, then the entire world should be worried.
So, after 6 long months of war, Israelis are weary. But there are still many threats, and people are wondering where this conflict is going. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Ashkelon.
And of course, the other question is, what is Iran capable of? Well, with me in the studio now to discuss this further is our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn. And Dom, I mean, Iran has been humiliated. They need to be seen to do something. The question is what?
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it different from the other attacks that Iran has suffered. Its proxies, its allies, its assets. Throughout the war, there have been attacks, but they appear to have been sort of bending over backwards to avoid escalating the war further. They don't want the war to be expanded into a regional war for economic, social, political reasons. But this is different because they do regard the embassy as sovereign territory. They know that an attack there, killing some of their top generals, is a flagrant provocation in their eyes. They say it's a breach of international law, and they will appear weak if they don't retaliate. So we've had a very different response from the Ayatollah Khamenei twice now, saying that Iran must punish Israel, that it will retaliate. So the question is how it does that, that the region really is holding its breath.
Yeah, because I guess you and I have talked a lot about this. Weakness in that region is not something that anyone wants to show.
Right, so it's got to do something, I think, in the minds of most observers and analysts, that kind of responds in a way that kind of saves face, but doesn't go so far, is not too strong a response to possibly plunge the region into a big regional conflict, which I think it's fair to say no one wants, although it's not entirely clear that is the case. So it has a number of options. It has all these proxies dotted around the region that's really been sort of goading Israel, instead of attacking Israel directly, saving face in the sense of letting the Houthis attack Israel. So the Houthis have a number of ballistic missiles that they've been firing at southern Israel. Iraqi, Iranian-backed militias also have ballistic missiles. They've also been letting loose in Israel's direction. Hezbollah has 150,000 missiles. It's thought some of them long-range and very precise. They could be used, but I think the assumption is that Iran wants to keep that arsenal for another day for when Israel attacks its nuclear facilities. So there's a problem with all these groups using them. That's why I think it may be more likely it decides to attack Israel directly.
I mean, there's been so much talk in the last few months about escalation, the war in Gaza spilling over to the rest of the region. And we know things can escalate very quickly. They can lead to miscalculations, which can lead to all-out war and various other things.
Yeah, I mean, potentially this is one of the most dangerous moments since the war began. The early days of the war, we worried about a regional war. It didn't happen. But I think we could be potentially back there, which is why we've had the British, German, Australian and Gulf Arab foreign ministers all talking with the Iranian foreign minister today. Some reassuring messages from that. The Iranians said to the Germans that they'll respond, but in an appropriate and limited way. And to David Cameron tonight, they've said that Iran does not intend to expand the scope of the war, but intent does not guarantee outcome in a war, as you say. Misunderstandings could lead to escalation. And, you know, the concern is that this does lead, even if it's a calibrated response from the Iranians, it could spiral out of control and plunge the region into a much bigger conflict.
Yeah, as you say, a dangerous moment. Everyone is on high alert and we will be watching very carefully. Thanks very much, Dom. That's all for this week's The World. Thank you very much for watching. Up next is the news at 10 with more reaction to the death of OJ Simpson. Good night for now.